The crystal chandeliers sparkled above the crowd like stars trapped in glass. Eleanor Whitmore moved through her penthouse apartment with the easy confidence of someone who'd never worried about money a single day in her life. Tonight was her annual charity gala, and everything had to be perfect. The caviar was flown in from Russia. The champagne cost more per bottle than most people earned in a week. And the guest list? Well, that was a who's who of Manhattan's wealthiest residents. Eleanor adjusted the diamond necklace at her throat and surveyed the room. 50 of the city's most influential people stood in small clusters, their laughter mixing with the soft jazz playing through hidden speakers. She'd made her billions in tech, building a software empire from nothing. At least that's how she told the story. The part about her father's initial $10 million investment usually got left out. Mrs. Whitmore, the catering staff needs direction in the kitchen. The voice came from behind her, soft and respectful. Eleanor turned to see Rosa Martinez, her housekeeper of 5 years. The woman had worked for her through 2 apartment moves and countless parties just like this one. She was reliable, quiet, and always seemed to know what Eleanor needed before she asked. Yet if you'd asked Eleanor to name Rosa's favorite color or her birthday, she would have drawn a complete blank. Yes, just tell them to keep the champagne flowing, Eleanor said, waving her hand dismissively. Then she noticed the teenage boy standing awkwardly behind Rosa in the hallway. He was maybe 17, dressed in dark jeans and a button-down shirt that looked freshly ironed. A worn violin case hung from his shoulder. "Who's this?" Eleanor asked, her eyebrows rising slightly. "My son, Diego. I'm sorry, Mrs. Whitmore. His ride fell through and he was waiting for me downstairs. The doorman let him come up. He'll stay out of the way, I promise." Eleanor's mind started turning. She'd been planning to hire a string quartet for entertainment, but they'd canceled last minute due to a flu outbreak. Her guests were sophisticated people who expected something special, something memorable. And here was this boy with a violin, probably able to play a simple tune or two. "He plays." Eleanor gestured toward the violin case. "Yes, ma'am. He's been studying since he was small." A smile spread across Eleanor's face. This was perfect. Her guests would love it. So authentic, what was the word they always used? Grassroots. Yes, they'd appreciate the genuine, humble touch of a working-class musician. It would make her look thoughtful and inclusive. "Wonderful," Eleanor said, her voice taking on that bright, enthusiastic tone she used when she'd made a decision. "Diego, was it?" "I'd love for you to play something for my guests. Just a little tune. Nothing fancy. They'll absolutely adore it." She watched as Rosa's face shifted through several emotions. The woman looked uncomfortable, almost embarrassed, but Eleanor was already moving past them back toward her guests. "Give him 15 minutes to get ready," Eleanor called over her shoulder. "And Rosa? Make sure he plays something upbeat. We don't want anything too depressing." Diego stood in the hallway, his grip tightening on his violin case. He'd been practicing for 4 hours that morning, working on one of the most technically demanding pieces in the classical repertoire. His fingers still ached from the complex passages. He was 3 weeks away from performing at a major youth competition, one that could change everything for his future. "Mama," he started to say, but Rosa put a gentle hand on his arm. "It's okay, mijo. Just play something beautiful. Show them what you can do." But that was the problem, wasn't it? Diego had spent the last 13 years proving what he could do. He'd won competitions. He'd earned a full scholarship to one of the best music schools in the country. His teachers called him exceptional, once-in-a-generation talented. Last month he'd been accepted to perform with a prestigious youth orchestra. And yet here he was being asked to play a little tune for people who probably wouldn't even listen. To them, he wasn't Diego Martinez, the violinist who'd placed second in the National Classical Music Competition last year. He was just the maid's son. Background noise for their expensive party. Inside the main room, Eleanor was already making her rounds, mentioning casually to guests that they had a special treat coming. "My housekeeper's son," she'd say with a knowing smile. "Plays the violin. I thought it would be nice to give him an opportunity." The guests would nod approvingly, impressed by Eleanor's generosity. Diego found a quiet corner near the kitchen and opened his violin case. The instrument inside was beautiful, even if it wasn't expensive. His mother had bought it for him 8 years ago, working extra shifts for 6 months to afford it. He'd long since outgrown its capabilities. A professional instrument would cost $30,000, maybe more. That might as well have been 30 million for their family. He lifted the violin from its case, checking the tuning automatically. Through the doorway, he could see Eleanor's guests. They wore clothes that probably cost more than his mother's monthly salary. They laughed easily, comfortable in their wealth. None of them glanced his way. Why would they? Rosa appeared beside him, carrying a tray of empty glasses toward the kitchen. "You don't have to do this," she whispered. "It's fine, Mama. Diego, I know what you're capable of. You don't need to prove anything to these people." He looked at his mother, seeing the worry in her eyes. She worked 12-hour days, 6 days a week. She cleaned other people's homes, cooked their meals, organized their lives. And every cent she earned beyond their basic needs went toward his music education. His lessons, his sheet music, his competition fees. She'd sacrificed everything for his dream. "I know," he said softly. "But maybe someone will actually hear me." Rosa's eyes welled up, but she blinked the tears away quickly. She couldn't afford to cry at work. "Then show them, mijo. Show them everything." Eleanor's voice rang out across the room, cutting through the conversations. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention for just a moment. We have a special treat tonight. Diego, come on out here." Diego walked into the main room, violin in hand. The conversations didn't stop. Most people barely looked at him. Eleanor stood near the windows, her smile wide and pleased with herself. "This is Diego, my housekeeper's wonderful son," she announced. "He's going to play us a little something. I thought it would be lovely to support young talent, don't you think?" There was a polite smattering of applause. Someone near the bar kept talking, their voice clearly audible in the room. Eleanor made a small gesture toward Diego, like she was giving him permission to begin, then immediately turned back to the woman beside her and resumed their conversation. Diego stood there, looking at these people who saw him as a novelty, a cute distraction, the maid's son with his humble violin, about to play a simple tune before they went back to their important lives. He raised the violin to his shoulder and closed his eyes. They wanted a tune, fine. He'd give them something they'd never forget. His bow touched the strings, and in that moment, Diego Martinez decided to show them exactly what genius looked like, whether they were ready to see it or not. The first note that came from Diego's violin cut through the air like a knife through silk. It wasn't loud. It wasn't aggressive, but somehow it demanded attention in a way that words never could. The man at the bar stopped mid-sentence, his glass frozen halfway to his lips. The woman who'd been scrolling through her phone looked up sharply. Even Eleanor, who'd already turned back to her conversation, felt something shift in the room. Diego's eyes remained closed. His bow moved across the strings with a smoothness that came from thousands of hours of practice. But this wasn't just practice. This was something else entirely. This was years of emotion, years of watching his mother's tired face at the end of long days, years of knowing he was talented but being treated like he was ordinary. He'd chosen to play Zigeunerweisen, a piece so technically difficult that even professional violinists approached it with caution. It started deceptively simple, almost like a folk song, but then it exploded into passages that required the player to move their fingers faster than seemed humanly possible. Within 30 seconds, every conversation in the room had died. The silence was so complete that you could hear the soft whistle of the wind against the windows 40 stories up. 50 of Manhattan's wealthiest people stood absolutely still, staring at the 17-year-old boy in the corner. Diego's fingers flew across the fingerboard, executing harmonics that sounded like multiple violins playing at once. His bow work was flawless, drawing out notes that ranged from whisper-soft to soaring and powerful. The music told a story, full of longing and joy, heartbreak and triumph. It was the kind of playing that didn't just reach your ears. It grabbed your chest and squeezed. A woman near the window felt tears running down her face and didn't bother to wipe them away. She'd attended the symphony dozens of times, always in the best seats. She'd heard famous musicians from around the world. But she'd never heard anything like this. Not from someone so young. Not from anyone, period. Eleanor stood completely frozen. Her champagne glass hung loose in her hand, forgotten. She'd expected pleasant background music. Maybe a simple classical piece that her guests could nod along to while they continued their networking. Instead, she was witnessing something that made her feel small and foolish. The piece moved into a section that required Diego to play notes so high and fast that they seemed to dance in the air above everyone's heads. His entire body moved with the music, not in a showy way, but like the violin was part of him. Like the music was coming from somewhere deep inside and flowing out through his fingers. In the kitchen doorway, Rosa pressed her hand to her mouth. She'd heard Diego practice countless times. She'd sat in uncomfortable auditorium seats at his school concerts and competitions. She'd always known he was good. But seeing him play here, in this place where she'd been invisible for 5 years, where her son was supposed to be invisible too, watching these people finally see what she'd always known was there, it was overwhelming. A man in an expensive suit near the fireplace recognized the piece Diego was playing. He was a conductor, someone who'd spent 40 years in the classical music world. He'd discovered talented young musicians before. He'd seen prodigies come and go. But this was different. The technical skill was extraordinary, sure, but it was the emotional depth that shocked him. You couldn't teach that. You either had it or you didn't. Diego moved into the final section of the piece where the music became almost violent in its intensity. His bow practically attacked the strings, drawing out notes that filled every corner of the massive penthouse. The chandeliers seemed to vibrate with the sound. Someone's champagne glass hummed in sympathy with a particularly low note. And then, just as suddenly as the intensity had built, Diego brought it back down. The final notes were soft, almost questioning. They hung in the air like smoke, gradually fading into silence. For 3 full seconds, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The silence after Diego's performance was louder than any applause could have been. Then the conductor started clapping. Not polite party applause. Real applause. The kind you give when you've witnessed something genuinely exceptional. Within seconds, everyone else joined in. The sound was thunderous. Diego opened his eyes and lowered his violin. He looked surprised, like he'd forgotten there were other people in the room. His face was flushed, his breathing a bit heavy from the physical demands of the piece. "Good Lord," someone whispered. "Who is this kid?" The conductor was already moving through the crowd toward Diego. He wasn't the only one. A woman who wrote for a major classical music magazine was pulling out her phone, her fingers flying across the screen. Several others pushed forward, suddenly very interested in the boy they'd barely glanced at 5 minutes ago. "Where did you train?" the conductor asked, reaching Diego first. His name was Vincent Chen, and his opinion carried weight in the classical music world. "Who's your teacher?" Diego seemed overwhelmed by the sudden attention. I go to the Riverside Music Academy. I have a scholarship there. My teacher is Professor Hoffman." "Hoffman?" Vincent's eyebrows shot up. "Julia Hoffman?" Diego nodded. "She doesn't take just anyone," Vincent said, more to himself than to Diego. "You're telling me you've been studying in this city and nobody knows about you?" "I compete sometimes," Diego said quietly. "I placed second in the National Youth Classical Competition last year." A ripple of shock went through the people now crowding around him. Second place in that competition was a huge deal. Winners of that competition went on to major careers. They got recording contracts, concert bookings, full scholarships to elite music schools. Eleanor stood at the edge of the crowd watching. Her brain was trying to catch up with what had just happened. This was Rosa's son. Rosa, who she said good morning to without really looking at her. Rosa, who she'd never asked a single personal question in 5 years. Rosa had a son who was, what, a genius? Is that what you called someone who could play like that? The music critic was already standing in front of Diego, asking rapid-fire questions. "How long have you been playing? What other pieces do you know? Have you been accepted anywhere for university?" 13 years, Diego answered. "And yes, ma'am. I got into Juilliard. Full scholarship." The room erupted in excited chatter. Juilliard. Full scholarship. This wasn't just some kid who was pretty good at violin. This was someone operating at the highest level of classical music. Vincent Chen pulled out his phone and stepped slightly away from the crowd. He made a call, speaking urgently to someone on the other end. When he hung up, he turned back to Diego with an intense expression. "I want you to perform with the New York Philharmonic," he said. "We have our annual gala concert next month. I want you as the featured soloist." The room went silent again. The New York Philharmonic was one of the most prestigious orchestras in the world. Being asked to perform with them, especially as a soloist, was the kind of opportunity that could launch a career. Diego looked past Vincent to his mother, still standing in the kitchen doorway. Rosa had both hands pressed to her face now. tears streaming between her fingers. Everything she'd worked for, every extra shift, every sacrifice. It was happening. Right here, right now, Yes, Diego said, his voice cracking slightly. Yes, I'd be honored. The woman with the phone had been typing the whole time. Within minutes, her article would start circulating online. Within an hour, the video that someone had recorded on their phone would start going viral. And by tomorrow morning, everyone would be asking the same question. How had someone this talented been hidden right under their noses? And more importantly, how many other people were out there, invisible to those who should have been looking? Eleanor caught Rosa's eye across the room. For the first time in 5 years, she really looked at her housekeeper. And she felt something she wasn't used to feeling. Shame. The party that was supposed to end at 10 was still going strong at midnight. But it wasn't Eleanor's party anymore. Not really. It had become something else entirely. A crowd had formed around Diego, and people who normally couldn't wait to leave these events were finding excuses to stay longer. Vincent Chen had convinced Diego to play 2 more pieces. Each one left the audience more amazed than the last. Between performances, guests peppered him with questions. Where would he study? What were his plans? Had he recorded anything they could buy? Eleanor watched from the side of the room, her champagne long since gone flat in her hand. She felt like a stranger at her own party. These were her friends, her business associates, people she'd known for years. But right now, they didn't even seem to remember she existed. Mrs. Whitmore? The voice was soft, hesitant. Eleanor turned to find Rosa standing beside her. The older woman's eyes were still red from crying, but she'd composed herself. She held a tray of empty glasses, still working even though her son was being celebrated 20 feet away. Rosa, Eleanor said, and then stopped. What was she supposed to say? Congratulations seemed wrong. She should have known about this. Should have asked. Should have cared enough to learn something about the woman who cleaned her home and organized her life. Thank you, Rosa said, for giving Diego this chance. Eleanor felt those words like a slap. A chance? She'd asked him to play a simple tune for background entertainment. She'd introduced him as my housekeeper's son, like it was a cute charity project. She hadn't given him anything. If anything, she'd almost robbed him of the moment by treating it so carelessly. I didn't know, Eleanor said finally. I didn't know that he could. I know, Rosa said simply. Those 2 words hung between them. I know. Rosa knew that Eleanor hadn't known. Rosa knew that in 5 years, Eleanor had never asked about her life, her family, her dreams, or her struggles. Rosa knew exactly how invisible she'd been. Why didn't you tell me? Eleanor asked, and immediately regretted how defensive it sounded. Rosa was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. You never asked Mrs. Whitmore, not about Diego, not about anything. I'm not saying that to be cruel. It's just the truth. In 5 years, you've asked me to do 1,000 things. But you've never asked me a single question about my life. Eleanor opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. Because Rosa was right. She could remember asking Rosa to pick up her dry cleaning, to schedule the cleaning service, to order groceries, to manage the caterers. But had she ever asked if Rosa had children? If she was married? Where she was from? What she did on her days off? No, she hadn't. He's been competing since he was 9 years old, Rosa continued, her voice soft. He won his first major competition when he was 11. I have a wall in our apartment covered with his awards and certificates. He practices 4 hours a day, every single day, even when he's sick, even when I beg him to rest. Eleanor felt something crack inside her chest. While she'd been complaining about minor inconveniences, Rosa had been raising a child who practiced 4 hours a day on top of schoolwork. While she'd been annoyed when Rosa asked to leave early once or twice, it had probably been to attend Diego's competitions or concerts. Last year, Rosa went on, Diego had a competition on the same day as your summer garden party. Remember? You needed me here all day to coordinate everything. I asked if I could come in early and leave by 3, but you said you needed me through the evening. Eleanor did remember. She'd been irritated that Rosa had even asked. It had seemed inconsiderate. Diego placed second in that competition, Rosa said. Second in the entire country for his age group. And I wasn't there to see it. He performed in front of judges and important musicians, and he looked out into the audience, and his mother wasn't there, because I was here making sure your guests had enough shrimp cocktail. The crack in Eleanor's chest widened. Rosa, I'm not telling you this to make you feel guilty, Rosa interrupted gently. I'm telling you because you asked why I didn't tell you about Diego. And the truth is, Mrs. Whitmore, I learned a long time ago that you didn't want to know. You wanted someone to manage your household, not someone with a life that might complicate yours. Across the room, Diego was laughing at something Vincent Chen had said. He looked happy, confident, nothing like the nervous boy who'd stood in the hallway an hour ago. How do you afford it? Eleanor asked suddenly. The lessons, the school, the competitions. That can't be cheap. Rosa smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. I work for you 6 days a week. On Sundays, I clean houses for 3 other families. I've been doing that for 8 years. Every penny from those Sunday jobs goes to Diego's music education. His school costs $30,000 a year, even with the scholarship covering half. $30,000. Eleanor spent more than that on clothes in a year. She'd spent almost that much on tonight's party alone. The violin he's playing, Rosa continued. I bought that for him when he was 9. It's not good enough anymore. He needs a professional instrument, something that costs at least $30,000 or $40,000. But we can't afford it. So he makes do with what he has. And still he plays like you heard tonight. Eleanor couldn't speak. She was thinking about the watch she was wearing, which had cost $50,000. She'd bought it on a whim because she liked the way it looked. She wore it maybe once a month, Mrs. Whitmore. Vincent Chen's voice called out. Could you come here for a moment? Eleanor walked over on numb legs. The crowd around Diego had grown even larger. Someone had opened several bottles of very expensive wine, and people were toasting the young musician like he'd just won the lottery. I was just telling Diego about the gala performance, Vincent said, his eyes bright with excitement. We'll need to discuss the details, of course. The payment for a featured soloist is $15,000. I hope that's acceptable. $15,000. For one performance. Rosa made $18,000 a year working for Eleanor, and probably another 15 or 20 from her Sunday jobs. Diego was about to make almost as much as his mother's annual salary from Eleanor in one night. The irony wasn't lost on Eleanor, or on anyone else in the room who'd been paying attention. That's more than generous, Diego said, looking overwhelmed. Nonsense, Vincent replied. That's standard rate for soloists. If anything, you're worth more. You'll be famous after this, mark my words. This performance will launch your career. Helen Morrison, the music critic, was still typing away on her phone. She looked up and caught Eleanor's eye. I'm publishing this story tonight, she said, not bothering with pleasantries. It's too good to wait. Young genius discovered at high society party, that sort of thing. People will eat it up. Eleanor felt a flutter of unease. What exactly will you say? Helen's smile was sharp. The truth, that Diego Martinez, son of a housekeeper, performed at your charity gala and revealed himself to be one of the most talented young musicians in the country. That he's been hiding in plain sight, attending one of the best music schools in New York on scholarship while his mother worked multiple jobs to support his dream. That's not... Eleanor started, then stopped, because it was exactly what had happened. I might also mention, Helen continued, how you introduced him. A little treat from our staff family, I believe you said. That's going to make for a very interesting contrast with the video of his performance. Eleanor's stomach dropped. Someone had recorded it. Of course someone had. Everyone recorded everything these days. Don't worry, Helen said, though she didn't sound particularly concerned about Eleanor's comfort. This is a good story. People love a feel-good tale about hidden talent being discovered. You'll come out of this looking... Well, you'll come out of it. But Eleanor knew better. She'd built her career reading situations, understanding how things would play out. And this? This was going to make her look exactly like what she was. Someone so wrapped up in her own world that she couldn't see genius standing right in front of her. Someone who'd treated a brilliant young musician like a party trick. Rosa appeared at Diego's side, carrying his violin case. Come on, mijo, she said softly. It's late. You have school tomorrow. But Mom, Diego protested. No buts. These nice people can celebrate without you. You need your rest. Vincent pulled out a business card and pressed it into Diego's hand. Call me tomorrow. We have a lot to discuss. As Rosa and Diego headed toward the door, the crowd parted for them. People called out congratulations and told Diego they'd see him at the concert. Eleanor watched them go, watched Rosa's hand on her son's shoulder, watched the pride in her face that had been invisible to Eleanor for 5 years. Just before they reached the door, Rosa turned back and caught Eleanor's eye one more time. There was no anger there, no resentment, just a quiet understanding that everything had changed. And there was no going back to how things were before. The door closed behind them, and Eleanor's guests slowly began to leave, still buzzing about the performance. Within an hour, the penthouse was empty except for the catering staff cleaning up. Eleanor stood at the window, looking out at the glittering lights of Manhattan, and wondered how many other people she'd failed to see. Eleanor didn't sleep that night. She sat in her living room as the sun came up, still wearing her party dress, scrolling through her phone. The story had exploded faster than she could have imagined. Helen Morrison's article went live at 2 a.m. By 6, it had been shared over 50,000 times. The headline read, "Hidden Prodigy Discovered at Manhattan Elite Party While Serving the Wealthy." It was sharp, pointed, and unfortunately, accurate. The video came next. Someone had posted Diego's full performance on social media, and it was spreading like wildfire. 2 million views by sunrise, 5 million by 8. The comments were overwhelming. This kid is incredible. How did nobody know about him? Of course nobody knew. They don't see people like him. His mom works as a housekeeper and he's this talented. That's a real story right there. The way that rich lady introduced him, a little treat from our staff family. I can't. That last comment had over 30,000 likes. Eleanor had watched the video herself, heard her own voice dripping with casual dismissiveness. She sounded exactly like what she hated most, someone who thought they were better than everyone else. Her phone started ringing at 7, her PR team panicking. Did she want to make a statement? Should they try to control the narrative? Eleanor told them she'd call back and turned off her phone. She needed to think. By 9 o'clock, news vans were parked outside Diego and Rosa's apartment building in Queens. Eleanor saw the footage on the morning news, reporters shouting questions as Rosa tried to get to work. Diego looking overwhelmed as he left for school, their private lives suddenly torn open for everyone to examine. Eleanor's phone was still off, but she could imagine the messages piling up. Business associates wanting to distance themselves, friends curious about the drama. Board members worried about how this affected the company's image. She didn't care about any of that. What bothered her, what kept her sitting in that chair as the sun rose higher, was the look on Rosa's face in those news clips. Tired, stressed, like this attention was just one more burden on top of everything else. At 10, Eleanor's assistant let herself into the apartment with her key. Patricia had worked for Eleanor for 3 years and knew better than to wait for an invitation during a crisis. "You need to see this," Patricia said, holding out a tablet. It was a morning talk show. They were doing a whole segment on Diego and Rosa. They'd dug up footage of Diego's previous competitions. They'd interviewed his music teacher, who spoke glowing about his talent and dedication. They'd found other students at his school who talked about how Diego practiced during lunch breaks because he didn't have time after school due to his mother's work schedule. Then they showed the part that made Eleanor's stomach turn. A split screen. On one side, Diego performing at Eleanor's party in his pressed shirt and old violin. On the other side, a photo of Eleanor from a magazine spread about her penthouse. The headline, "The Invisible Genius, How Wealth Creates Blindness." "It gets worse," Patricia said quietly, switching to another channel. This show had found out about the Sunday Rosa had missed Diego's national competition. They'd somehow gotten the information about her working 3 jobs. They'd calculated what Rosa probably earned versus what Eleanor was worth. The numbers on screen were brutal. Eleanor Whitmore, billionaire tech CEO, pays her housekeeper approximately $18,000 annually, while Diego Martinez's music education costs $30,000 per year with scholarships. Rosa Martinez works 7 days a week to bridge that gap. The host's face was stern. And when this talented young man performed at her home, Whitmore introduced him as a little treat from the staff. A little treat, as if his years of dedication and his mother's sacrifice were just entertainment for bored millionaires. Eleanor set down the tablet. "Turn it off. There's more," Patricia said. "Social media is calling for boycotts. Your company's stock dropped 2% this morning. The board wants an emergency meeting." I said turn it off, Patricia did. The silence in the apartment felt heavy. "What are you going to do?" Patricia asked. Eleanor didn't answer right away. She was thinking about Rosa's face last night. about the quiet dignity in her voice when she said, "You never asked," about Diego looking at his mother for approval before agreeing to perform with the Philharmonic. "I'm going to fix this," Eleanor said finally. "A public apology? A donation to music education? We can spin this." "No spinning. No PR tricks. I'm going to actually fix it." Patricia looked skeptical. She'd seen Eleanor handle crises before. It usually involved lawyers, carefully worded statements, and strategic charitable donations that made problems disappear. "What does that mean?" Eleanor stood up for the first time in hours. Her legs were stiff, her dress wrinkled. She felt every one of her 43 years. "It means I'm going to do something I should have done 5 years ago. I'm going to pay attention." An hour later, Eleanor stood outside Rosa's apartment building in Queens. The news vans were still there, though most of the reporters had wandered off to get coffee. The building was old but well-maintained. Nothing like Eleanor's gleaming tower in Manhattan. She'd never been here before. Never thought to ask where Rosa lived. Never considered that Rosa had a whole life that existed outside of Eleanor's penthouse. Eleanor climbed 3 flights of stairs because the elevator was broken. The hallway smelled like someone was cooking rice and beans. Children's voices echoed from somewhere above. This was a real neighborhood, a real community. Nothing like the sterile luxury Eleanor lived in. She knocked on apartment 3C. Rosa answered, still in her work clothes. Her face showed surprise, then wariness. "Mrs. Whitmore, I wasn't expecting—" "I know. Can I come in?" Rosa hesitated, then stepped aside. The apartment was small, maybe a quarter the size of Eleanor's living room. But it was immaculate. A tiny kitchen opened to a living area with a couch that had seen better days. Pictures covered every wall. Diego at different ages holding his violin. Award certificates in frames. Report cards with straight A's. Diego sat at a small table in the corner doing homework. He looked up when Eleanor entered, his eyes widening. "I'll make coffee," Rosa said, moving toward the kitchen. "No, please, can we talk?" They sat on the old couch. Diego stayed at his table pretending to work but clearly listening. "I've been watching the news," Eleanor started. "I've seen what people are saying." "I'm sorry about that," Rosa said quietly. "I never wanted this kind of attention. The reporters have been calling all morning. Diego couldn't even get to school without cameras in his face." "You're apologizing to me?" Eleanor felt that crack in her chest widen. "Rosa, I'm the one who should be sorry. I am sorry for how I treated Diego last night, for how I've treated you for 5 years, for not seeing what was right in front of me." Rosa didn't say anything. She just waited. "I've been thinking all night," Eleanor continued, "about what you said, about how I never asked. You were right. I never did. I treated you like you were just part of the apartment, like the furniture or the appliances, something that was just supposed to be there and work when I needed it. Mrs. Whitmore, please let me finish. I built my whole career on seeing potential, on identifying talent and innovation. That's what made me successful. But I couldn't see it in my own home. I couldn't see that the woman who organized my entire life was sacrificing everything for her son. I couldn't see that the boy I asked to play a little tune was a genius." Diego made a small sound from his table. Eleanor glanced over and saw him staring at his homework, his jaw tight. "I can't undo what I did," Eleanor said. "I can't take back those words or give you back the time you've lost. But I want to try to make things different going forward. And I need to ask you something, Rosa. Why did you stay? Why did you keep working for me when I treated you like that?" Rosa was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was steady. "Because I needed the job. Because the pay was reliable and the hours were regular, which meant I could plan my other work around it. Because sometimes we don't have the luxury of working for people who see us as human beings. We work for people who pay us and we do the best we can with what we have." The words hit Eleanor like physical blows. This was what privilege looked like. Being able to choose who you worked with. Being able to walk away from situations that didn't respect you. Rosa had never had that choice. "I want to change your salary," Eleanor said. "Triple it." "No, quadruple it." Rosa's eyes widened. "Mrs. Whitmore, that's not necessary." "It is necessary. You've been underpaid for years, but more than that, I want to offer you a different position. I'm expanding my charitable foundation. I need someone to run the day-to-day operations, someone who understands what it's like to struggle, someone who knows what people really need, not what rich people think they need. The salary would be $80,000 a year to start, with full benefits and a retirement plan." Rosa looked stunned. From his table, Diego had abandoned all pretense of doing homework and was staring at his mother. "Why are you doing this?" Rosa asked carefully. Eleanor met her eyes. "Because it's the right thing to do. Because I've been wrong about almost everything. And I need to start being right. And because—" She paused, feeling emotion well up. "Because when I watched Diego play last night, I realized I'd wasted 5 years of knowing someone extraordinary. Both of you. And I don't want to waste any more time." Rosa's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. "I need to think about it. Of course. Take all the time you need." Eleanor stood to leave, then turned back. "And Rosa? Diego needs a proper violin. I'd like to buy him one. Not as charity. As an apology for not seeing his talent sooner. And as an investment in someone who's going to change the world with his music." She left before Rosa could respond, walking back down the 3 flights of stairs to the street where cameras immediately started flashing. 3 months passed before Diego's debut performance at Carnegie Hall. 3 months that changed everything for everyone involved. Rosa had accepted Eleanor's job offer after 2 weeks of careful consideration. She'd consulted with Diego, talked to friends, even met with a lawyer to review the contract. When she finally said yes, it was with clear boundaries and expectations. She would run Eleanor's charitable foundation, but she would do it her way. No more invisible labor. No more pretending her expertise didn't matter. The foundation's first initiative was a scholarship program for talented young musicians from working-class families. They called it the Martinez Fund, and Rosa insisted on being involved in every decision. She knew exactly what these families needed because she'd lived it, not just tuition money, but instrument funds, competition fees, transportation costs, and support for parents who had to take time off work for performances. Diego got his new violin 2 weeks after Eleanor's visit. She'd taken him to one of the finest violin makers in New York, and for the first time in his life, Diego had played an instrument worth more than most people's cars. The sound that came from it made him cry. Rosa cried too, watching her son hold something that would have taken her 15 years to save for. But the violin came with a condition that Eleanor insisted on. It wasn't a gift. It was a loan. "Someday," Eleanor had told Diego, "when you're successful and famous, you'll pass this violin on to another talented kid who needs it. That's how this works. We lift each other up." The news cycle had been brutal for the first few weeks. Eleanor's face was everywhere, usually alongside unflattering headlines. Her company's stock had dropped, then slowly recovered as she made real changes. She'd started paying all her employees better wages. She'd funded scholarships at 3 different schools. She'd done interviews where she openly discussed her mistakes instead of hiding behind corporate speak. Some people forgave her, many didn't. Eleanor learned to live with that. She learned that being humbled wasn't the same as being humiliated. It was actually a gift, even though it didn't feel like one at first. Now standing in the lobby of Carnegie Hall on the night of Diego's debut, Eleanor felt nervous in a way she hadn't felt in years. She'd bought out an entire section of seats not for business associates this time, but for people who mattered. Rosa's extended family, Diego's teachers and classmates from the music academy, other scholarship students from the Martinez Fund, kids who needed to see that someone like them could stand on this stage. Mrs. Whitmore, a young girl, approached her shyly. She was maybe 12, holding a violin case that looked too big for her small frame. "Are you really Eleanor Whitmore?" "I am," Eleanor said, crouching down to the girl's eye level. "What's your name?" "Lily, I'm one of the Martinez Fund scholars. I just started violin last year." "That's wonderful. Are you excited to hear Diego play tonight?" Lily nodded enthusiastically. "My mom says he used to be just like me, that he didn't have money for a fancy violin or expensive lessons, but he kept practicing anyway." "That's exactly right," Eleanor said. "And you know what? He's proof that talent and hard work matter more than money ever could." Lily beamed and ran back to her mother, who gave Eleanor a grateful nod. These small moments had become Eleanor's new measure of success. Not stock prices or magazine covers, but the look on a child's face when they realized their dreams might actually be possible. Rosa appeared beside her, elegant in a dark blue dress. She'd been handling press interviews all week, telling Diego's story but also talking about the systemic changes needed to support talented kids from working families. She'd become something of a spokesperson, and she was good at it, natural and honest in a way that resonated with people. He's nervous, Rosa said quietly. I just saw him backstage. He's been practicing 8 hours a day for 2 months and he's still worried he'll mess up. He won't, Eleanor said with certainty. He's too good, I know. But he's still my baby. I'm allowed to worry. They stood together in comfortable silence. Their relationship had changed in ways Eleanor couldn't have predicted. They weren't exactly friends. The history between them was too complicated for that. But they'd become something else. Partners, maybe. 2 women working toward the same goal, finally seeing each other clearly. Thank you, Rosa said suddenly, for all of this. I know things started badly. But what you've done these past 3 months, it matters, Eleanor shook her head. I should have done it 5 years ago. I should have done it the first day you worked for me. Maybe. But you're doing it now. That counts for something. The lights flickered, signaling that the performance would begin soon. People started moving toward their seats. Eleanor and Rosa walked together into the main hall. Carnegie Hall was packed. Every seat filled. Diego's story had captured people's imagination, and everyone wanted to witness this moment. The buzz of conversation filled the ornate space, a mix of excitement and anticipation. Eleanor looked around at the crowd. She recognized some faces from her world, wealthy patrons of the arts who'd always attended these events. But there were so many others too. Regular people who'd bought the cheapest seats just to be here, parents with their kids, music students, people who saw themselves in Diego's story. The lights dimmed. The orchestra took their places. Then Diego walked onto the stage. He looked different than he had 3 months ago. More confident. He wore a tailored suit that actually fit him properly. He carried his new violin like it was part of him. But underneath all that, he was still the same kid who'd stood nervously in Eleanor's hallway, unsure if he belonged. The conductor raised his baton. The orchestra began to play, and then Diego lifted his violin and joined them. The music was transcendent, even more beautiful than that first night at Eleanor's party. Diego had grown as a musician in these 3 months. The pressure, the attention, the expectations, they'd all pushed him to dig deeper, to find even more emotion in the notes. Eleanor found herself crying halfway through the first piece. Not sad tears. Not even happy tears exactly. Something bigger than that. She was crying for all the lost time. For all the ways she'd been blind. For the gift of finally seeing clearly. Beside her, Rosa wept openly, her hand pressed to her heart. This was the moment she'd dreamed of for 13 years. Every double shift. Every missed birthday party. Every time she'd chosen Diego's lesson fees over buying herself something new. It had all led here. The first piece ended to thunderous applause. Diego bowed, then turned and gestured to his mother in the audience. Rosa stood overwhelmed as people around her clapped. Eleanor stood too, along with everyone else in their section. A standing ovation not just for Diego, but for the woman who'd made it all possible. Diego played 4 more pieces, each one more breathtaking than the last. By the end, the entire audience was on their feet, applauding so loudly the walls seemed to shake. After the performance, there was a reception. Diego was surrounded by people wanting to congratulate him, to offer opportunities to be part of his future. Record labels, concert promoters, famous musicians who wanted to collaborate. His life was about to change in ways he couldn't even imagine yet. Eleanor hung back, watching from a distance. This wasn't her moment. It never had been. She'd just been lucky enough to witness it. But Diego found her eventually, working his way through the crowd with Rosa beside him. Mrs. Whitmore, he said, and his voice was warm. Thank you for coming. I wouldn't have missed it for anything, Eleanor said honestly. You were magnificent. I wanted to tell you something, Diego said. I've been thinking a lot about that first night. About how angry I was when you asked me to play. I thought you were looking down on me, you know? Treating me like I was nothing special. I was, Eleanor admitted. I'm sorry, I know. But here's the thing. If you hadn't asked me to play that night, none of this would have happened. I'd still be talented, sure, but I'd still be invisible too. So maybe it happened the way it needed to happen. Eleanor felt her throat tighten. That's generous of you, Diego shrugged. My mom taught me that people can change if they really want to. And you changed. You didn't just apologize. You did something about it. You're still doing something about it. That matters. Rosa squeezed her son's shoulder proudly. Come on, mijo. There are more people who want to meet you. As they walked away, Eleanor stood alone for a moment in the crowded reception hall. She thought about the person she'd been 3 months ago. So certain of her place in the world. So comfortable in her privilege. So blind to the extraordinary people right in front of her. That version of herself was gone. And Eleanor didn't miss her at all. She looked around the room at all the scholarship students from the Martinez Fund, at the families who'd scraped together money for tickets, at Rosa standing tall beside her accomplished son. This was what mattered, not penthouses or stock prices or magazine profiles. This. People seeing each other, people lifting each other up, people getting the chances they deserved. Eleanor pulled out her phone and opened her notes app. She started typing ideas for the Foundation's next initiative. There were so many other talented kids out there in so many different fields, kids whose genius was invisible because of where they came from or who their parents were, kids whose potential was being wasted because people like the old Eleanor couldn't be bothered to look. She couldn't fix everything. She couldn't undo all the harm that inequality caused, but she could do something. And maybe, if enough people did something, the world could change. One overlooked genius at a time. Diego's laughter rang out across the room as someone told him a joke. The sound made Eleanor smile. That laugh, full of joy and possibility, was the sound of a future that almost got missed. A future that almost stayed invisible, but not anymore. Now everyone could see it. And that, Eleanor thought, was the best kind of miracle. The kind that happened when people finally opened their eyes.